I want you to take a look at some of those stereotypes, like the one about Latino men and women, the one about Black men, some of the ones about white men and women, and Asian men and women, right? I want us to look at those stereotypes, look at the comments, and start to think, like, are these stereotypes negative? Are they positive, Sarah? Do I agree with them? And do I disagree with them? This time we're not going to take our sticky notes. We're just going with our groups and we're having those conversations.
The approach to education has to include social justice. It has to prepare students to enter the world where there is no cocoon, there is no real protection for students of color. We can't operate a school and ignore the realities that are occurring on a daily basis. This is sacred work. We can't falter. We just can't. Their very lives are dependent on it, mostly our own.
Greetings, good brothers, and welcome to the first session of our Dine and Discuss series. The Education Committee hopes that tonight will be informative and enlightening as we discuss the African American male in academics, friend or foe. Please feel free to join in the conversation. Tonight, we have our panelists, myself representing elementary, Brother LaFleur, Spring 18, Gamma Beta Sigma. Each brother will introduce themselves as they present their information for tonight. So tonight, I will be talking about colorism in elementary. And so let me get this shared really quick and we will get started. All right, so for colorism, what we want to understand is that it breaks down into three pieces, three components, which is race, skin tone, and academic achievement. And so each one of these components will help us understand how colorism affects African American males in the classroom. So I first want to begin by defining what colorism is for you. Colorism is a form of oppression that is oppressed through a hierarchy treatment of individuals where typically favoritism or superiority are associated with those of lighter complexions. And those of darker complexions tend to experience rejection and mistreatment in some areas of the educational system. So as we explore tonight, we're going to explore how colorism in the classroom and how skin tone stratifies African Americans. And so what we want to talk about is the racial inequality, how it is frequently studied in education as it relates to skin tone stratification. And when we're talking about stratification, we're basically talking about data or the collection of information on a particular group like African Americans, light skin versus dark skin. So it has received less attention from educational researchers, but we know that inequality by skin tone has also, which is also known as colorism, contributes to racial inequality patterns for African Americans. So some effects from skin tone discrimination show up in different components of our lives, which include education, employment, housing, spousal status, criminal justice, sentencing, and even levels of depression and self-esteem. So although research documents skin tone differences in education, it does not document the actual social practices that create these differences. Some of these practices known as color-based discrimination include the halo effect, the beauty queue, racial capital, bleaching syndrome, and the school to prison pipeline. So let's talk a little bit about the halo effect. The halo effect is one trait of a person or thing which is used to make an overall judgment of that person or thing. So an example would be someone that may be very attractive. That's a trait that they're attractive. So we would automatically assume or make a judgment that because they're very attractive, they would be able to take very great photographs, or they would be very photogenic. And so that's what we mean by the halo effect. When we're talking about the beauty cue, we're talking about a concept explaining how sexism and racism interact to create a cue of men and women ranging from the lightest to the darkest, in which the lightest gets the most resources. Skin color is a privilege, the privilege of being considered more beautiful as a result of having lighter skin. When we're talking about racial capital, we're talking about the process of deriving value from the racial identity of others. We know that this harms individuals affected and society as a whole. So basically, we're talking about making money off of Black and brown bodies. The bleaching syndrome is where people of color, including African Americans, Asian and Latino Americans, are both victims and perpetrators of color discrimination. The bleaching syndrome encompasses perpetual psychological and behavioral sectors that affect students' experiences in schools. And when we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, this is the process in which students are pushed out of school through out of school suspensions, expulsions, and overly harsh discipline, and into the prison system. So there are 5 reasons that colorism faces in the classroom. We know that in one of the 5 key issues of colorists in the classroom, we know that education has always been a strategy to oppress and dominate. It has intentionally excluded people to perpetuate a socioeconomic division. We know education also enforces compulsory education, which refers to a period of education that is required of all people and is imposed by the government. Another reason we have is the vast majority of our teachers are white women in particular, who have explicit prejudices, implicit biases, and blind spots, which make schools less safe for students of color, especially dark-skinned students. Colorism impacts quantity of schooling. Light-skinned students attain more years of schooling, more advanced degrees, and are more likely to finish. This is in of itself impacts economic disparities, employment, income wealth gaps, and etc. Quantity of schooling is directly influenced by quality of education. We know that another reason for colorism in the classroom is that colorism, because of the implicit biases and explicit prejudices, reduce the quality of the education. The perceptions of deviance aggression, there's perceptions of intelligence, social life among student peers. The cumulative experiences year after year affect self-esteem and become self-fulfilling prophecies. And the last reason is we know that curriculums are everywhere, and it's based on white supremacy. This includes what is taught and how it's taught. So basically, we know that the government is predominantly dominant with white individuals. And so that curriculum is designed and looks like white individuals. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the relationship between skin tone and school suspension for African Americans, and how the data shows that the school to prison pipeline starts as early as preschool. So the Department of Education, it reports that Black students are disproportionately suspended from class starting as early as preschool, based on data collected by the US Department of Education from all public school districts between the years of 2018 to 2021. We know that Black preschool children are 3.6 times more likely than white children to receive one or more out-of-school suspensions. We also know that African-American boys were more likely than girls to be suspended in preschool. Continuing from Department of Education, it also reports that there's a pattern that continued this source through K-12, where Black students were 1.9 times more likely than white students to be expelled from school without educational services, which means that they weren't receiving any support at home outside of the school. We also know that they're 2.3 times more likely to be disciplined through involvement of officers, such as a school-related arrest. This was also true for multiracial boys and Native American boys, who also faced higher rates of expulsion. So when we are talking about how skin tone affects suspension for African American boys in schools, we also know that it leads to a pipeline in education. And so that school to prison pipeline is a term used to refer to the trend in school discipline policies that push students out of school and on a pathway to prison. We know that this is because it often refers back to a zero tolerance policy in the school. And our schools are to blame for these policies because they're mandated policies that school officials must administer. And sometimes they're very strict and harsh punishments, such as suspension or expulsion to students whenever a rule is broken, regardless of the circumstances. So when we have our African-American boys on a pipeline to prison, we all lose out in multiple ways. We lose out economically because people who are poorly educated earn less, pay less in taxes, and need more services. They are also the most likely to end up in prison. So as we end our section on colorism, I want to leave you with the note. I want you to think about a preschool student and how a preschool student bites another student and how a teacher may react. If that teacher is white and the student is white, there might be a different pathway if the teacher's brain that says, oh, I recognize that this is a developmentally appropriate behavior, or I recognize this because I've seen it in my own child or relatives, so I know how to respond. Whereas if the student were Black, there might be different assumptions. There might be thought that this is the beginning of aggressive behavior that we need to manage, or we may not be educated enough to understand the culture of Black students. So therefore, we are creating a rash, life-changing decision in seconds for a student in preschool. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to pass it over to Brother Rush.
You're on mute, Brother Rush.
Good evening, brothers. Let's see if I can share my screen here and get this started. I don't know. Can the brothers see that?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Let's see if we can get. So I'm Brother Keith Rush, Spring '88, Tau Epsilon Sigma, of course, by the way of Rho Beta chapter. I'm a school teacher, ELA, English Language Arts at Thomasville Middle School. And my topic is gender. How does gender affect middle school young males, particularly Black males, I believe. But so I'll begin. So I first want to start off by talking about defining maybe two key terms gender, and gender identity. We like to say that gender refers to the characteristics and behaviors that a society or culture associates with males and females. Gender identity is an individual's deeply held sense of being male, female, or another gender. This is separate from biological sex. We like to think that gender affects and shapes young Black males' standing and options in the world, and affects their functioning within the institutions and communities in which they exist. Young Black males in middle school is a critical period for identity development. Our young men are developing a sense of their personal identities as in relation to their social surroundings and environment, along with their interactions with others. It is this time during the middle school age, our young adolescent males, they become more conscious of their social identities, how they are viewed and how they're treated by others. Young Black males in the middle school age group commonly encounter gender and racial experiences in school that challenges the meaning and the value of their identities, such as discrimination in the classroom or peer humiliation. Some other things that Brother LaFleur mentioned can also be some of those experiences that carry on from elementary to the middle school. It's interesting to note that in the past 50 years or so, young girls have been redefined to know how to be a female in America. They are told that they can do anything and be anyone. However, boys, on the other hand, our young males, have been left behind to a certain degree. There's not been much of a movement as for the girls to help them navigate through a full expression of their gender. It is no longer enough to be a man, but we no longer even know what that means. So let's look at the definition of a man. What is a man? And as you think about this rhetorical question, guys, kind of think of here's some thoughtful questions that you may want to encounter when answering that question. What qualities do the men you respect and admire have? What values and morals do they live by? What kinds of things do they say and do? What do people mean when they say, man up? What qualities are real men assumed to have? And how are they expected to speak and act? How are they not supposed to behave? These are some questions that may be thought about and probably experienced among the young men in the middle age group, and they experience some of these and probably have thought themselves trying to find their way and trying to find what is a real man. So I like to say that we probably need to be more present in young men's lives to help deconstruct this negative definition of masculinity in our society. I think with the programs that we have out in the community, especially our own in Phi Beta Sigma, our Sigma Beta Club, and some other avenues in the community, in our church, YMCA, all of those, not just on the football field and on the basketball court, but just be present. I think we can sort of deconstruct those negative definitions of gender and masculinity, that we'll be able to define what is a real man. And so, as best said by Camille Bousset, to be male, poor, and either African American or Native American is to confront on a daily basis a deeply held racism that exists in every social institution. Our young men can be successful in all aspects of their lives. I just think we need to be more present. And those are some of the works and things that I've used in my PowerPoint. So I'd like to turn it over to the next brother. If I can end this. Let's see, I'm not good at stop share. There you go.
Good evening, brothers. Can you all hear me? So usually by the time a young man ends middle school, they have pretty much made up their mind about whether or not they're going to continue through their high school journey. And so tonight, I am Kevin L. Maxwell, Spring 94 initiate into Pi Mu chapter from Western Carolina University. And so I'll be looking at the academics in the African American male. And I pose the question, is this the end, the high school years? So our purpose is to understand the plight of the African American male throughout academia, as well as throughout the high school in particular. And it is our goal tonight that our chapter will apply the knowledge that we learn to aid Davidson County schools to motivate Black males to graduate high school, to enroll in college, and ultimately graduate from a post-secondary institution. So in North Carolina, a student at the age of 16 can legally drop out of high school without their parents' permission. Nationwide research has shown that the graduation rate of Black males is only 59%, which is the lowest of any population in the country. And there are numerous statistics that point to the reason that African American males in particular wind up dropping out of high school. And we will deal with those in just a moment. So dropping out of high school is strongly tied to socioeconomic status. Generally, students, young men who come from low income areas, usually 2.4 times more likely to drop out than middle school kids, or middle income kids, excuse me. Unlike students from wealthier families, they are accustomed to be taught that they are going to go on to college, et cetera. So there's a plan generally that's already in place for students that come from a wealthier background. According to Jawanza Kanjufu, ninth grade is the most critical level in high school, because it is at that point that the student will make the decision whether or not they are going to physically become absent from school, what we call dropping out. But we must realize, brothers, that the seeds were planted, as both Brother LaFleur and Brother Rush have said, while they were in elementary school as well as in middle school. Unfortunately, by the time our young men get to high school, 89% of them are not able to compute on grade level. Most of them have just been pushed through the system and they've been promoted to ninth grade. Many of them are reading on sixth grade levels. And so they find themselves unequipped to deal with the rigor of the entry-level courses of algebra, biology, literature, and all of those other first-year subjects. And with that in mind, they began to consider seriously about dropping out. These are some statistics in North Carolina, and I want to specifically focus on African-American males. So African-American males make up 26.1% of all of the students that are in North Carolina schools. Of that 26.1%, 30.5% of those African-American males will ultimately wind up being dropouts. And also, if you look here at 71%, there are some indicators that will tell educators if an African-American male or if a student period is going to drop out. And according to these indicators, most times 71% of African-American males wind up dropping out, or they are on the road to dropping out. And so these are some of the reasons why African-American males wind up dropping out. As been said before, discipline. African-American males are disciplined more harshly than most other racial groups. Expulsions, they deal with more expulsions as well as suspensions. Additionally, African-American males also have to deal with incarceration. Again, going back to the pipeline to prison. So for the smallest offense, young African-American males wind up doing time, whereas our white counterparts may get just a slap on their wrist or on their hand, and they are sent back to live life as normal. These are also the breakdowns of other racial groups and the reasons that they also wind up dropping out. And I wanted us to take a look at the Davidson County statistics. So Davidson County Schools has a total of 18,723 students. Of those, 3.6% of those students are African American, which comes up to be about 674 students. The overall graduation rate of Davidson County is 88%. Of that 88%, only 82% of African-American students graduate. And that's both male and female. But of the 82%, which is the 553 students, only 52% of those students wind up graduating. So 288 African-American males wind up dropping out of high school every year in Davidson County. And you can see our white counterparts, they graduate at 89% from high school in Davidson County. And so what is it that keeps our students in school or vested in school? Generally, is athletics. If they are not successful in academics, somehow they find themselves successful in athletics. And that is unfortunate because most of them have pipe dreams that they're going to make it to the NBA or to the NFL. And of course, we know that rarely happens, that a student coming out of high school will go college level to play or even go professional. I want to share this quote. Why should we have to go to class if we came here to play football? We ain't come to play school. Classes are pointless. And that was by Cardell Jones. He is a student who spoke volumes in that statement of the mindset of most African-American males, or many African-American males. They're so focused on athletics that academics shift out the way. According to the 2010 NCAA goals and scores, athletics take precedence over academics in Division I. And so, in other words, people are more concerned about whether or not you can carry the football or bounce the basketball than whether or not you can read a book. And so I pose the question to you, brothers, tonight. Are we using athletics as a modern day auction block for our African American male students? And I want to share this very quick video with you, brothers.
Like so many black kids who are very athletic, I dreamed of going to the NFL. And then when I actually started experiencing it, it blew my mind how disappointing I actually was, starting with the combine, where we get broke down to our tights and we get walked on the stage and twirled around. And my weight, height, length, all the above is talked about. And after that's done, I walk down the middle of, 1,000 people.
Should it be video or just audio?
About that. One of the most
it's a video. You guys can't see.
Yeah, we can hear it. We can't see it.
There has to be a better way.
Okay.
I grew up in Texas and I saw cattle being done this.
I apologize. I'm not sure, but I don't want to waste time. So we'll just keep listening to it.
The sad thing about it was they used to tell me that NCAA is a meat market. Man, they are looking for you because you are a gorgeous piece of meat. Straight like that.
The black body is the commodity. And I think when we talk about ownership, we talk about power, today's black body is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
And so the black male body, or the black male, is often seen as a piece of meat. The NFL is worth over $2.8 billion, and there is not one black coach. I know that there is some conversation now about finally getting a black head coach in the NFL, but as you heard, they are put on a stage and turned around, much like our ancestors were on the auction block. And so if you don't make it academically, and then you don't make it athletically, for many African-American males, unfortunately, their last option is to drop out of school. Our desire as a chapter is to begin to mentor and to tutor African-American males so that ultimately they will see their value and graduate from high school, enter into post-secondary education, and ultimately graduate from that institution. And I'm going to now turn it over to Brother Dr. Hatch, who is going to share with us about post-secondary and beyond.
Good evening, brothers. I'm about to share my screen. Let's see here.
All right, trust that everyone can see this. Today, and so we've had conversations about colorism and what it looks like going into elementary, middle, and high school. And so this is kind of the culmination at the end of your learning trajectory when it comes to education and being an African American male. And so tonight, I'm going to share on the many faces of the African American male, college and beyond. So tonight, first, we're going to talk about where we are as African American men. Where are we in this post-secondary educational space? And so Brother Maxwell previously talked about these things that impact us and our success and what that means moving forward. So now let's talk about what that looks like. We'll go through some data points. We'll talk about post-secondary education and the prismatic nature of what that looks like. But then most importantly, we're gonna have a conversation on why this matters, and then we'll close out with a Q&A. So first, let's talk about where are we? Post-secondary education, traditionally people think after you finish high school, either you don't go to college or you go to college, and that's pretty much it. But we now know, especially with some very intentional efforts when it comes to our workforce and our labor market, we're having much more different conversations on what it looks like to do post-secondary education. So the first thing is the community colleges. I'm a former community college administrator, and I can tell you that community colleges truly are the gateway for so many people when it comes to their ability to earn a successful living, to be engaged in an actual trade and field, or to give them their gateway to actually a college and university. Here in North Carolina, we have an articulation agreement with all 58 community colleges and the 16 universities that are in the UNC system, to where if you earn a 2-year degree, many of them fully loaded, fully free, you actually can go and transfer all of those credits to a college and university. So for individuals with any type of barrier to education, be it financial, be it housing, be it that you really don't have the means to up and move somewhere, community college being much more localized to where people live, you can do that for 2 years and transfer all of those 70 plus credits to a college and university that's a public institution and have them counted towards your degree, with you doing another 1.5 to 2 years and getting that 4-year degree. Of course, college and the universities, for North Carolinians, we have plenty of college and universities, but the fact that we have so many HBCUs, I believe North Carolina has more HBCUs, I think, than any other state, or we're in at least top 1 or 2. But when you think about that, we've got public, we've got private, we've got large, we've got small. Of course, you all know that many of us are graduates of the illustrious North Carolina A&T State University. So we are the largest and the #1 public HBCU in the country. But then let's also talk about beyond. So workforce development. These are programs that are geared towards getting people directly to a career path, often through community colleges. But let's talk about learning outside of that. When you go to your job, and you're onboarded, your orientation, that's a learning experience that's being facilitated. When your job wants you to learn something new, when you do continuing education credits, when you do any type of workshop to get a certification or get any type of new knowledge you need, that is workforce development. And that is something that we need to see more Black men in, of course, with all the other spaces as well. Now let's talk about a very disturbing statistic. In 2019, only 36% of Black students, 41% of Latino students, 38% of American Indian, Alaska Native students, and 46% of Asian Pacific Islander students were men. So if you think about that, just in the comparison, we actually represented as Black men the lowest number of our racial demographics that were represented for being men. The enrollment and graduation rates for men of color in higher education lag behind not only those of white male students, but those of women of color. And so what we've seen, especially in post-secondary, is this kind of interesting trade-off. If you look back 30, 40 years, there were more Black men enrolled in colleges than Black women. About 20 years ago, that slowly crept up, and now we see this significant shift where if you look at even HBCUs, some campuses have 2 to 3 women for every 1 man that is actually enrolled. This is all coming from the Post-Secondary National Policy Institute. Additional data points. Men of color represented 17.5% of all post-secondary enrollment and 43.9% of all male student enrollment in 2019. Once again, post-secondary, not only including colleges and universities, but also including graduate, also including community colleges as well. Most disturbing, Black men represent 4.6% of all post-secondary enrollment. Once again, not just college and university, but all post-secondary, everything after high school. Since 2000, fewer men of color than women of color have been enrolling in undergraduate programs. Once again, that goes back to this shift that we're seeing of the last 20 years. It is slowly, the tables have turned. In 2016, Black men comprised only 5% of all undergraduate students enrolled in institutions of higher education. Now, this is interesting because think about all the knowledge and the experiences that take place in an undergraduate program. And only 5% of those individuals are people who share the racial demographics of those of us on this call. Community colleges serve as the primary pathway into public institutions of higher education for male students of color. 62% of male students enrolled in the 2015-2016 academic year attended a community college at some point in their college career. For those of us who work in education and those of you who've seen it, there has been an intentional effort to kind of change the stigma behind community colleges. When I was finishing high school almost 20 years ago, I remember, there was not all this popularity about going to a community college. People didn't really want to share that they were going to a community college, or if you went to a community college, it was almost this stereotypical indictment that you could not get into a four-year institution. And though those days have gone, it's not true anymore. You have students who are turning down top universities locally to go to community colleges because, number one, if you can go for free, and those 2 years that you would normally do at a traditional college and university can be free and transfer them all in, it's a much more effective way to go. Also, smaller classes, more convenient schedules, which are beneficial to a lot of students. So let's discuss a couple of things. Number one, Black men enrolled in community colleges, universities, and graduate programs. All of these points that I have on this slide really speak to everything we've been talking about tonight as a whole. So we know that when you are enrolled in a program, you go on to get a job, you go on to impact society, all these things that come from just this one enrollment point. Two, Black men in teaching, administrative, and learning facilitation spaces. To me, this is probably one of the top most important things we'll talk about tonight, because when it comes to a student being able to see, a young Black man able to see a Black man to be his teacher, to be his counselor, to be his principal, to be his academic advisor at college, to be his professor, to be his residence hall director, to be his training orientation coordinator when he gets the job, to be his supervisor, to be that ongoing person, representation matters. Three, Black men in research and educational policy. Everything that we do, every conversation we're having, all boils down to research and policy that has led us to this point. It is no surprise, it is no magical making that we are in this place when it comes to Black men in educational spaces. All these things are the byproducts or direct results of policies that we're not reflected on when it comes to the person who wrote it, the person who voted on it, the person who advocated for it, and the person who implemented it. And then four, Black men in trades, apprenticeship programs, advanced manufacturing. We all know that a four-year degree is not the absolute go-to and guarantor for you making a whole lot of money. Okay, let's be 100. I have a whole PH and a D, and I know people who have gone through 2-year advanced manufacturing programs who make more money than I do and owe a significant amount of less money than I do to student loan company. We know that trades, advanced manufacturing, these are all gateways that we can go into that can still mean you can contribute to society, make good money, be knowledgeable, but we need to see more of us in those programs. Now let's talk about some leaders in colleges and beyond. Now, the great thing about all the men on this slide is they are all our fraternity brothers. We've got Dr. Wayne Lewis at Houghton College. Dr. Algie Gatewood right up the road at Alamance Community College, and then Dr. Brian McGowan at American University. Many of you all probably have met Dr. Gatewood, being that he's local. Also, Brian formerly was at UNCG. All of these men are well accomplished, advocate on a regular basis for Black men in these various spaces, being college and beyond. So we're talking, Brian McGowan does policy work. He's a professor, he does research. Dr. Gatewood, Alamance Community College, is a huge leader in the workforce and skilled trade spaces. And then a very traditional view of four-year institutions, Dr. Wayne Lewis. So we are in these spaces, but it's important because this is a very small percentage. Now, we need Black men to inhabit all learning spaces. And when I say all learning spaces, I mean that we need Black men who are in the learning spaces that teach us trades, that advise us academically, that everything we do when it comes to learning, everything you learn to do, which is everything, a Black man being to inhabit that space. Black men who are teaching us at our four-year institutions, Black men who are teaching us when we go to our jobs and we have to go to a training. And of course, Black men in a very traditional space of four-year to also university. So let's talk about why this matters. Black men that are disregarded following high school graduation, and then what's next? Many of you all may have experienced or seen Black men who get left off after 9th, 10th grade. It's like they don't care about what we do. They don't care about our future. It's pretty much like, well, okay, what's next? I am a perfect example of this. I finished high school with a 1.8 GPA. I was deemed the kid who would never go to college, would never do anything successful. Was not at all deemed college material. I went to a predominantly white high school in Guilford County Schools, had no Black teachers, often the only Black kid in my class, no Black counselors, and totally was just kind of left out of that process. Thank God I had parents, family, mentors who supported me, but I could have easily been one of those kids who got left off and dropped off because no one was investing in me as a student in high school. Also, Black men that learn and are led by Black men. Once again, representation matters. And then an intentional conversation on what is our why. Why do we do what we do? What are we doing about it? All being educated Black men who are professionals on this Zoom call, in our chapter, in our international organization. What is our why? We talk about education as something we want to influence, something we want to do, but when it comes down to it, exactly understanding what we're impacting, how we're influencing, and how that can be measured in changing lives for better living. All of that being what is our why and why we do what we do. I know I went pretty quickly, but I wanted to make sure that Brother LaFleur was not going to send me an angry text and be like, hey, you're talking too long. I do want to say, I think the questions, the comments, the thoughts, the open dialogue, this is for all of our presentations, not just mine. So brothers, definitely opening up to you all so we can have a conversation on some of the stuff we talked about tonight.
I have a quick comment. I think it's important because a lot of you all are educators, but I'm not. And I think it's important that because I make myself available to my daughter's elementary school to help mentor some of these young men that are deemed problematic. I think that it's important, as some of you said it during your presentation, that they need to see folks like us. I think there's only one African-American educator at my daughter's particular school, and he's the social worker. So he ends up with all of the problematic kids, and we end up having to mentor them. But I think it's important that for those that are not educators, make yourself available to the school. And I know we have Sigma Beta Club, and we're ramping that up in Davidson County, but we have to make ourselves available because it's important that, and I think it was said that representation matters. And I know my story, like I'm not perfect at all. I've got issues. I've had some background issues. And it's important that people still see you can be successful, even if you get into some sort of issues. And so representation matters. So make yourself available. That was my point. Just a comment. And I second everything else that was said on this presentation. Great presentations, by the way.
Brothers, I want to definitely commend you all for a job well done, because these are topics that are very relevant to our African-American males. And as a school administrator, now for my 7th year, I was a school social worker for about 19, 20 years. And some of the things that you guys brought out are spot on, particularly with our African-American men, young males who act out with behavior issues. And I can't tell you how many young men I counseled as a social worker and an administrator. When you get to the root of the issue, these young men are acting out because their father is not in their life. Whether their father is incarcerated or their father is with another woman and he's not paying any attention to this young man. That is the root cause sometimes when these young men are acting out, and you see the high number of suspensions. I deal with it every day, and you guys are right. Teachers have implicit biasness. They look at our young men and they want to be so punitive to them, and they want to put them out of school for any and everything. So one of the reasons why I got into administration, because I wanted to make a overall difference and be able to impact the instruction and the discipline with our African-American males particularly. And as you all have pointed out, and you gave great data points, our young men and our young ladies are suspended at high numbers. And we look at that at our schools. I was at Jamestown Middle and now I'm at Southwest Gifford High. And I don't care what school you go to, what school you work at, it's always African-Americans. The subgroup is the top when it comes to discipline, but we're at the bottom when it comes to academics and it comes to the testing. We're always at the bottom. And so, brothers, this work is very important because there are young men in Davidson County that needs us, that need the work that we're talking about right now. If you look at some of my posts on my page, my Facebook page, and working with some of the Sigma Betas, and part of my campaign is to have those young men to post about the impact that I made in their lives. Brothers, it's like bringing me to tears about what they're saying about the difference that I made in their life. But brothers, we have to help advocate, because sometimes they put our boys on the community college track, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if those young men have the ability to go to a four-year university, let's make sure they get into the universities of their choice. And I had to deal with that with one of our young men who the counselor had him on the community college track, and she didn't feel that he was good enough to go to a four-year university. Well, this young man graduated from A&T and is living in Georgia and doing pretty good now. But because I advocated for him, that put him back on the track to go to a four-year college. So thank you, brothers, for bringing these points out. Because again, I was just jotting notes down. Everything you guys were saying, I'm like, spot on. So thank you. I'm gonna hush now so someone else can have some other points, but I may jump back in a little later too. Great conversation, brothers. Thank you.
I have another comment, and it's probably going to be a little, I don't know, controversial, but I think that also, because we keep talking about four-year colleges and community colleges, but at the end of the day, that's not for everybody. I think you have to expose folks to all the possibilities, right? Military. I grew up in a military family. My dad's retired Army. And that was one of my two options, was the military or college. And I chose college because I didn't want to cut my hair. But I felt like I think we really need to do a better job of exposing these possibilities and allowing these young men to chase their passions. Like we always, it's frustrating to me because we always force college on folks, and it's not for everybody. Like it was great. I enjoyed, had a blast at A&T. But that also comes with debt. Like that stuff needs to be explained to these young men as well. And you can have a passion. You like cars. Like let's do an auto shop. Like go learn a trade. Like it's not always about college. And so I think that's important too, to also provide all the possibilities and not just one. Because I with my daughters, that college is definitely not the first thing I'm telling them. You want to be a dancer? Nah, we gonna make it happen. We're gonna put you in the best dance schools. We're not gonna send you to to a four-year university. Chase your path. You want to open a dance school? That's what we're gonna do. So allow these people or these young men to chase their passion. And if they want to be, if they want to be in the music industry, like God, allow them to find a mentor, right? And let them explore. It's okay to fail. We have to stop forcing folks to do something that's maybe not them. Just my opinion.
No, you're right, man, because that's, again, Guilford County, we focus on college and career readiness. But in my notes, I've been jotting down, everybody does not want to go to college. You're right. So there's welders, plumbers. I mean, they've taken out industrial arts in high school. I know at Andrews, they have an auto mechanics program, but a lot of those hands-on programs we don't have anymore in high schools or middle schools. And some of these young men, they need that hands-on type of work. Because I know electricians, they make more money than me. And so those are some things that we definitely got to continue to push. And you're right, Brother Beard, to because everybody's not going to go to college. But there's also barbers, young ladies want to do stylists, salons, beauty school, and we're not pushing that enough. And so that's some things that we need to also make sure our young men have those opportunities as well.
And I also think that it was a great job coming from the stance of including all additional after school type things. For example, different facets of being an educator, because I am a corporate trainer, so I educate myself as well, and I see that gap when it comes to even in corporate, who makes it through those training weeks, who tends to drop off, what's the reasons that they tend to drop off. And it's amazing that those trends don't just stop once you've made it out of the college realm. It keeps going into your professional realm. So that was a great point. So I'm glad we spoke on that.
Yeah, I would like to chime in. Rashad, great point that you did raise. Just coming from the city of High Point myself, really with my father not really in my life, I could have easily been a statistic myself, but I was able to make it to college. But I think one of the things that I think is critical at a young age for African-American men is basically exposure. You don't know what you don't know. So how can we allow these young gentlemen to tap in certain jobs or trades that may be of interest to them? They may like to work with their hands, but they have never worked with a contractor. We had renovations done in our house last year, had a Black contractor who owned his own business, and he was just talking about just the opportunities that he had because there's just so much work out there. But these young generations don't really want to tap into that. So it's really, I think, is a gap that we do have, is just being able to tap into those exposure opportunities. Do we know people that are Black-owned businesses, that are dentists, that are doctors, that are plumbers, that are don't mind getting messy? And then can we just have like a day of sitting with these young gentlemen and say, this is what I do, this is the things that I see as opportunities of what you can prosper in these fields. And then with that exposure, it allows them to really branch their mindset as far as like, oh, I can do this too. I had no idea. Oh, this is like how much money that you're making in a year. I had no idea. Or working in finances. Oh, this is how I can manage my money as far as making sure I get to the goals that I want to prosper in my life. I had no idea. So we're looking at Davidson County. A lot of these young gentlemen probably never really got outside of the county. So how can we get them outside of the county, venture out of the state, venture out of the country a little bit, talking about that, jobs that allow you to do that, and they pay for you to get out the country? Just having those ideas and those type of things in mind, I think will really benefit me if I was in that stage at a young age, could really help out a lot of these younger individuals as well as we continue to progress in this type of discussion.
Yeah, that was a great point, Brother Anderson. I think we, even in the men's group that I run, the volunteer group that I run for my daughter's elementary school, we have each one of our dads give a presentation about what they do, right? So come in and say, hey, this is what I do. Not necessarily how much money I make, but this is the opportunity. This is the route I took to get there. So we break it down to them at every single level. It's definitely something we can implement. And I think it's a great idea, man. Call all, and Miss Sellers from in Thomasville, she has a link to all of the Black-owned businesses. We call them up and have them do a presentation. And I think that can connect the dots. How'd you do it? How'd you get there? Let me pick your brain for a second. And that really sparks, because you have access to that person. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And I keep going back to myself because I wish I known. I would have done things a lot differently had I know what I know now. And it was the product of my parents. They were only exposed to two things, military. And then my parents didn't go to college, but they wanted me to. So I'm living vicariously through them. And they kind of chose the path for me. So exposure is the biggest thing. I completely agree with that.
I think one of the things, and I can't remember who did the presentation about dropping out of school, but one of the things that our African-American males, they don't have a lot of hope, and they don't have vision. When you ask them what they want to do in life, they can't tell you. Like I think Brother Maxwell said, or play NFL or NBA, that's an easy answer. But they don't know what they don't know. And there was a young man at my high school, and he does, I would have never known it. We just got into a conversation. He designs clothes. And he gave me his phone, and he just let me look through his phone about things he designed. And so now I'm trying to get him connected with some African-American designers here in this area. If you guys know any, let me know, because I want to get him plugged in to brothers or sisters who are designing clothes so that he can now network with them and start continuing to change his mindset about what he wants to do. So he knows what he wants to do. He just needs that guidance or that push to get him to the next level. And so those are the things, like you said, those networks, those connections, that's so valuable for our kids who are not, he's not really engaged in school. What we find is teachers, I'm at Southwest, they're not providing sometimes culturally relevant instruction. So our guys tap out. They go to sleep, they start acting out, they start roasting and burning each other, and then they get put out of the class. And so what we're now doing is trying to make sure our teachers are providing culturally relevant instruction and not just about the Holocaust, you know what I'm saying, but other things about African Americans and a diverse type of instruction, because we tend to sometimes focus on teachers teaching what they're comfortable with teaching. And then when they're uncomfortable with teaching, they don't teach. And our kids don't learn our culture.
Brother Lewis, you just hit on a point that I think is big for us as Black men, is that I don't think we get a chance to dream and to have our dreams considered to be career worthy, right? So if you look at all these maker spaces and creator spaces, and then these people who are in these spaces who make wood-grained cheese cutting boards and all this creative stuff, who are encouraged to embrace it and, take time and all this kind of stuff. And you don't see many of us in those spaces because we don't get a chance to dream. What are we told? Because our parents know what we're up against in the world. We're told, what's going to give you health coverage? What's going to give you retirement? What's going to help you pay rent and mortgage? What's going to keep food on your table? So even though we have these passions, we have these things that we love and we're interested in, rarely do we ever get someone sit down with us and say, let's flesh that out a little bit. What does that look like? I mean, that's, I tell people all the time, I could do creative stuff all day. That's my passion. But never was I ever told I could do that. It was, bro, you need to go get a job. What you gonna do? What's gonna give you retirement? What's gonna give you health coverage? Not, let's embrace this creative side of you and go from there.
Absolutely. And see how the network is so valuable in this discussion, because Brother Anderson, I see your chat. And so definitely your wife's line sister works for Hanes brand. And so that's the connection that we're talking about, is how can we connect these young men to people that we know that's in our network. So I'll get with you, Brother Anderson, and talk with this young man and see what we can do.
Brother Lewis, I would like to piggyback on what you mentioned earlier, talking about culturally relevant pedagogy and what is taught in the classroom. I know in my line of work, a lot of our programs are ideally designed for Caucasian individuals. And so it has been one of my goals as an administrator here to make sure that they look at things from a culturally relevant lens. And even in the state that I'm living in, they have passed a bill not to teach critical race theory in the classroom. And so to me, these are microaggressions that are leading across the state to limit our voice within our school systems. And so it makes our HBCUs so vitally important to keep them and support them Just recently, there was bomb threats at a lot of HBCUs, and that was one of my institutions that I work at. And so it is intentional that they're going after these schools. And so we as alumni at these HBCUs, we have to support these schools more than just at homecoming, but we need to make sure that we're supporting them through our pockets and making sure that they get the right support and dollars invested in their institutions.
Absolutely. One of the things is it's all about equity, y'all. My principal, and I'm at Southwest High School. Y'all, I was at Jamestown Middle and I was comfortable, and I didn't see, the district transferred me to Southwest because the superintendent needed me to be over there with the principal. But I now see the vision of why I need to be there. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure that our young men and young ladies of color are able to take AP classes, advanced placement courses. Oftentimes we get overlooked and teachers on the council don't recommend us. I didn't take an AP class in high school. I took the honors, but I didn't take AP. I don't know if you guys took it or not, but we're making sure that our kids have the opportunity to take AP classes, and they don't have to have a 4.0 GPA. We're looking at kids now for registration for next year who have maybe a 2.8, but who have the potential and who have the desire and the will to take an AP class. So we're looking at trying to change our equitable outcomes at our schools, because the superintendent now, although she's getting ready to leave us, she's been pushing our district to make sure our students of color are able to take these advanced courses, in which oftentimes we get looked over.
And I think another thing that we need to also look at is partnering with parents, because when it comes to school or the educational system, a lot of times parents of minority students do not know the lingo. And so they need somebody that can go with them into the school and talk to them. Having a special ed background, a lot of Black boys that are in there could have missed being a part of special ed, but there was nobody there to voice for them or to be a voice for them. And so that is something I would really love to see us do, that in Davidson County, as we're partnering with young men, we're partnering with their parents and saying, hey, let us go in and sit with you and talk with you about what they're saying. Because many times parents are afraid of school. They won't say it, but they're afraid. And so they take the voice of the Caucasian teacher that says he's never going to be anything, versus somebody with them that will be like, yep, he can be it. We just got to work a little bit harder.
That's a good point, Brother Maxwell. I've just been in a 3-hour EC training today, and a lot of our boys and young ladies are overly represented in EC classes. And Brother Maxwell, he's an former EC teacher, and he's an expert, and so he knows all too well, brothers. But again, it takes that advocacy to help our parents out, because they don't know that language, and they come to IEP meetings and they just go with whatever the teachers and the team recommends. And so, but then when you get those parents who advocate, the teachers look at them like they're being difficult, and they're not being difficult. They're just advocating for their child. But when a white parent comes in and they advocate for their child, it's a different story, so that's a good point, Brother Maxwell.
Brothers, I think that was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed myself tonight. So Brother Maxwell has put a Google Doc survey in the chat that we would like for you to complete to tell us about your experience. Any final thoughts, questions, comments, ideas before we end our first Dine and Discuss? And I gotta say, I really appreciate everyone for coming out. That's really great, man.
Brothers, I wanted to commend the brothers for the well thought out, well presented program. And I was hoping, I'm thinking, and I'm just maybe off the top of my head, I'd like to see this, sent out social media, publicized in some shape, form, or fashion, so that others can see it and maybe make an impact to those who weren't able to enjoy this wonderful discussion that we had this evening. Great job, brothers.
Yeah, excellent job.
Great
Great
program,
job.
gentlemen. Well done, well done. Very beneficial and educational. Good swing.
Yep, outstanding.
Oh, so please complete the survey. Let us know what you think as we prepare for our next Dine and Discuss. Also, volunteer forums, since we talked about education and the impact that we need to make on African-American males, it's time to move on to Thomasville Middle School and get to work. Other than that, gentlemen, we appreciate you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hatch, Brother Maxwell, Brother Rush, for a job well done. If there are no other comments or questions, I bid you a good night.
All right, brothers.
Yeah,
Are we still recording? Are we still recording?
we are, but we can stop.